Since Russia attacked Ukraine in 2022, Kyiv has conducted dozens of assassinations outside the battlefield, targeting Russian military commanders in Sevastopol, political officials in the Donbas region, and journalists. The most recent attempt was aimed at Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov. Assassination is generally understood as killing through a secret or surprise attack. During wartime, it refers to attacks outside the combat zone. Mary Ellen O'Connell, a law professor at Notre Dame University, argues that regardless of who commits the act, under whose orders, or for what reason, assassination is always illegal. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 declare that killing, injuring, or capturing an enemy by treachery, such as pretending to be a civilian or feigning non-combatant status, is strictly prohibited. At that time, the assassination was labeled as treachery. Despite this prohibition, many nations have resorted to assassinating their adversaries, including Russia, the US, and notably Israel. This fall, Israel eliminated the leadership of Hezbollah, significantly weakening its military capability. This forced Hezbollah to withdraw from southern Lebanon, while its bases in Syria were also severely debilitated. However, Ukraine's recent assassination attempt on a Russian general cannot compare to the scale and effectiveness of Israel's operations against Hezbollah. Kyiv's government hopes such assassinations will undermine Russian society's morale and leadership. Yet, they seem to have the opposite effect, angering Russians and prompting more significant retaliation. Observers believe the assassination campaign against Russian generals, carried out by Ukraine's security service, might be an attempt to compete with Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate. The assassination also suggests that Kyiv aims to demonstrate its capability to counter Russia effectively outside the battlefield. In reality, the act signifies weakness, executed out of desperation rather than pragmatic calculation. Historically, one of the most notable assassinations was that of the infamous butcher Reinhard Heydrich, described as Hitler's most brutal henchman. The plan, devised by British intelligence, was executed by two Czech commandos in June 1942. At the time, German forces were advancing on the Russian city of Stalingrad, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill wanted to prove that Britain still held influence. Heydrich's death was a provocative blow to Nazi Germany's prestige, prompting Hitler to unleash a wave of vengeance. Leidich, a small village in Bohemia where the assassination occurred and where the two commandos hid, became a sacrificial victim. The town was obliterated. At least 1,300 Czechs, including 200 women from the village, were killed in Hitler's retaliatory campaign. To this day, historians continue to debate whether the assassination was worth it, given the massacre of thousands of civilians that followed. We present this example solely to emphasize the importance of prudence in all calculations, and it is hard to say that the assassination of Russian General Kirillov will bring any prestige to Ukrainian intelligence. Objectively speaking, Russia cannot evade responsibility for its decision to attack a sovereign nation. However, suppose Ukraine continues to carry out assassinations outside the combat zone, thereby violating the laws of war. In that case, it will only give Russia an advantage internationally, especially as Russia continues to garner support from neutral countries. As Trump's envoy once remarked, the tactic of targeted assassinations against Russian officials is both illegal and unwise. If Trump takes office, his administration will pressure Ukraine to halt such escalations. Putin threatens missile duel with the US. Amid Russia's dominance over Ukraine on the battlefield, in recent months, some leading NATO members have revived the idea of sending Western troops to Ukraine. As we know, President Zelensky has stated that negotiations with Russia will only begin if the West provides security guarantees for his country, such as admitting Ukraine into NATO or deploying European troops after a ceasefire agreement. However, both of Kyiv's demands have yet to receive a definitive response from the West. Reuters reported on December 18 that Kyiv is in a weakened position in the war, leading European leaders to avoid giving President Putin the impression that it is time for both sides to negotiate, potentially allowing Russia to retain its battlefield gains. Therefore, Europe will focus on increasing military and economic aid to Ukraine. Additionally, some officials are considering how European nations could provide security guarantees for Ukraine, including deploying ground troops. Ukraine, on its part, has mentioned that European countries such as France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and the UK could contribute forces. However, public statements from these nations so far contradict Kyiv's claims. For instance, Reuters reported that Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated his country has no plans to participate in such a force. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius indicated that Berlin might play a role in ensuring a ceasefire, but said it was too early to mobilize troops. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte even urged his NATO colleagues in Ukraine to exercise utmost restraint when discussing these scenarios. Debates about sending a Western force to Ukraine have also exposed confusion among NATO members. The most crucial factor the West has yet to address is that deploying its forces without Russia's consent would lead to a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. From Russia's perspective, whether under the guise of peacekeeping forces or not, they will not agree to NATO troops operating after a ceasefire, as this contradicts Russia's primary objective in attacking Ukraine. Preventing NATO from approaching its borders, the Kremlin would see this as a significant escalation and has already threatened war with the West. Trump's stance is quite clear. Ukraine will certainly not be allowed to join NATO for at least the next 20 years. He also stated that Americans will not participate in peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. During President Putin's year-end QA press conference with journalists yesterday, the Russian leader warned of the potential use of more Oreshnik missiles. He also invited the West to conduct a test and technical duel by launching an Oreshnik missile at Kyiv. President Putin said, "There is no chance of shooting down these Oreshnik missiles. If Western experts think they can intercept these missiles, we propose to them, let's conduct some kind of technological test, a high-tech duel of the 21st century." He directly challenged the U.S., saying, "Let them name a target, for example, in Kyiv, concentrate all their air defense and missile defense forces there, and we will strike with Oreshnik to see what happens. We are ready for such a test. Is the other side ready?" Of course, this challenge from Putin is aimed at the Biden administration, which desperately supports Kyiv's escalation in its final days. However, during the same press conference, President Putin emphasized his willingness to engage in direct dialogue with President-elect Donald Trump at any time, and expressed readiness to meet Trump whenever the U.S. is prepared for a summit. He also admitted that he had not spoken with Trump in over 4 years. With these optimistic signals, there is hope that the Kremlin will make reasonable calculations before escalating further with the deep state forces. Currently, all eyes are on Trump's cabinet selections, with each figure reflecting the future direction of Washington's domestic and foreign policies over the next 4 years.